When Shaquille O'Neal pulled into the long gravel driveway of the small brick house on Magnolia Lane in San Antonio, Texas, at 9:47 on a Saturday morning in early March, he was not dressed like a man worth $400 million. He wore a faded gray t-shirt with a small tear at the collar, jeans that were softer than denim should be after that many washes, and the same scuffed work boots he wore to work on cars in his garage. No watch, no chain, no assistant. Just a single set of keys and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. The house smelled, when he opened the front door, like cedar from the closets and the faint chemical sweetness of old shoe polish, and something underneath that he could not name and did not want to. It was his stepfather's house. Philip Harrison had been gone for almost 5 years. The family had finally decided, after 4 false starts, that it was time to clear out the back bedroom. Shaq had volunteered to do it himself. He had told his mother on the phone the night before that he wanted the morning alone in there. He had not told her why. He stood in the doorway of that back bedroom for a full minute and a half before he stepped inside. 4 championships, a net worth of over $400 million. One of the most recognized faces on planet Earth. And Shaquille O'Neal walked into that bedroom and said absolutely nothing. He noticed the first thing before he reached the closet. A small wooden box sitting on top of the dresser, the lid slightly ajar, a corner of yellow paper sticking out of one side, the box carved with the letters PH in a clumsy hand on the lid, the way a young man carves something when he has just learned how. He noticed the second thing on the nightstand, a photograph in a thin black frame, face down, dust on the back of it that had not been disturbed in years. He noticed the third thing on the chair by the window, an army duffel bag, neatly folded, with a Bible-sized rectangle pressing against the canvas from the inside. The canvas creased into a pattern that suggested whatever was in there had been in there a long time. He noticed the fourth thing in the closet itself when he finally opened it. A row of 3 identical white shirts on hangers, freshly pressed, the kind Philip had worn to church every Sunday for 30 years, and tucked behind the third shirt, hanging by a thumbtack on the back wall, a small unsealed envelope with one word written on the front in pencil, in Philip's handwriting, and the word was simply Shaquille. Shaq looked at the envelope for 2 full seconds. He did not reach for it. Not yet. He filed it all away. He kept moving. Now here is the part nobody outside that house understood yet. Here is the secret Philip Harrison had been carrying for the last 33 years. The thing his stepson had absolutely no idea about as he stood in that small back bedroom with the cedar smell and the dust. One single decision Philip had made in the spring of 1991, quietly, without telling anybody, not Lucille, not Shaq, not the man it had been about, had set a chain of events in motion that touched 4 families across 3 states and 3 generations and was still moving on the day Philip died. The envelope on the back wall of the closet was not what most people would assume it was. It was not a goodbye. It was not a final speech. It was something far smaller and far heavier. And what was about to happen in that bedroom in the next 20 minutes would not be settled by grief alone. It would be settled by the man Philip had been when nobody was watching, and by a name written at the bottom of a single page that Shaq had not yet read. Stay with us for the whole video, because what you are about to see is not a story about a son finding a letter from his dead father. It is a story about a quiet act from 33 years ago that walked alongside this family the entire time, and the moment its full length finally became visible in one room on a Saturday morning in March. He was born in Newark, New Jersey, in 1972. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, was a small woman who held 2 full-time jobs and never once let her son believe that smallness and softness were the same word. She taught him a sentence when he was 7, standing in a cereal aisle in East Orange, that he carried for the rest of his life. She said, "Baby, the men who change your life don't always shout. Sometimes they just stay. Sometimes they just keep showing up. You learn to recognize that or you don't. And the ones who don't learn it grow up to be lonely men." He was 7. He never forgot a word of it. His biological father was absent in the way absence has of becoming its own loud presence in a house, and into that space stepped a man named Philip Harrison, a sergeant in the United States Army who married Lucille and became, in every way that mattered, Shaq's father. Philip was strict. Philip was quiet. Philip had one rule he said so often it stopped being a sentence and became weather. He said it driving to school. He said it after games. He said it the night before Shaq left for LSU, the morning of the NBA draft, and in the hospital the year before he died. Don't be a reaction, be a response. Philip said it the way other men say grace. Philip Harrison is the ghost of this story. He has been gone almost 5 years on the morning Shaq walked into that small back bedroom in San Antonio, and there is not a single room Shaq enters that Philip is not standing in. He grew up tall and then taller. LSU. Drafted first overall by the Orlando Magic in 1992. 3 championships in a row with the Lakers, and 1 more with Miami. A doctorate in education. A life that on paper looked like a fairy tale and in person looked like a man who flew himself to San Antonio on a Saturday in March because his mother said it was time, and because some things, his mother had always told him, you do yourself with your own 2 hands. But before any of that, before the championships, before the doctorate, before any of it, there was a boy of 17 who had spent most of one summer fighting with the only father he had ever really had. That summer was 1989. Shaq was already 6'10". He was angry the way only 17-year-old boys with absent biological fathers know how to be angry, quietly, with the windows rolled up. Philip had 10 o'clock house rules and did not bend them for anybody. They had argued for most of June. They had stopped speaking for most of July. The last week of July, sitting on the back porch with mosquitoes coming up from the grass and the moths trying to get into the porch light, Shaq had said something to Philip Harrison that he had been carrying as quietly as Philip had carried his envelope for the next 33 years. He had said, "You are not my real father. You never were. I let you live in this house. That's not the same thing." Philip had not said anything back. Philip had stood up, walked into the house, and closed the screen door behind him so gently it did not even click. 3 weeks later, Shaq left for LSU. 2 weeks after that, Philip showed up in Baton Rouge with a folding chair, sat in the parking lot of Shaq's dorm building for 6 hours waiting for him to come back from class, and when Shaq finally rounded the corner, Philip stood up and said only, "Don't be a reaction, be a response. I came to give you the rule one more time because I won't have you out here without it." Then Philip got back in his car and drove 11 hours back to San Antonio without sleeping. They never spoke about July again, not for the next 31 years. Shaq had carried that silence with him for so long he had stopped noticing it had a weight. He was about to find out it had been carrying him, too. The first thing Shaq did in the bedroom was sit down on the edge of the bed. The mattress was old, and the springs sighed underneath him the way old mattresses sigh when they recognize a body they have not held. He sat there for almost 10 minutes before he reached for the wooden box on the dresser. Inside were 3 medals from Philip's Army service, a Purple Heart he had never displayed, a small black and white photograph of Philip and Lucille at City Hall on their wedding day, and a folded program from Shaq's college graduation in 2000, the corner creased softly where Philip's thumb had rested. Underneath the program was a folded yellow page that turned out to be a list, in Philip's handwriting, of every game Shaq had ever played in the NBA Finals, the date, the score, who had been guarding him, and one sentence after each one. The first sentence on the list, after the Lakers' 2000 Finals Game 1, simply said, "He did not foul out. He listened." The last sentence on the list, after the Heat's 2006 Finals Game 6, simply said, "He won it for somebody else." That was a man learning a rule. He held that list for a long time. Then he went over to the closet and finally took the envelope off the thumbtack and brought it back to the bed and let it rest on his knee for almost 5 minutes before he opened it. But before you hear what was in that envelope, you need to feel the full weight of everything that came before it. Of what Philip had done in 1991, of who he had done it for, of why the envelope had been hung on the back wall of the closet instead of left somewhere obvious, and what kind of man hides his final letter in the only place his stepson would ever look on the kind of day his stepson would only come looking on. Nobody in the house moved. The cedar smell got sharper. The clock in the hall ticked once. Shaq opened the envelope. The letter inside was 2 pages, handwritten in pencil, on the same yellow legal pad paper the list had been written on. The date at the top was March 11th, the year before Philip died, 3 months before the diagnosis, before anybody knew anything. The letter said, "Shaquille, if you are reading this, you are in the back bedroom, and your mother has finally told you it is time. I want to tell you about a Tuesday in May of 1991, because you have never asked, and I have never offered, and I am running out of years where the offering is still mine to do. There was a man in my unit named Eugene Walters. He had a wife and a small son back in Houston. Eugene was killed 2 days before we shipped home. The Army gave his wife the standard letter and the standard check, and that was the end of what the Army was going to do. The boy was 7. I had a 7-year-old boy at home myself. You. I went to see Mrs. Walters in Houston in May of 1991, and I told her I would pay for that boy's schooling all the way through, every cent of it, with one condition, which was that she would never tell the boy where the money came from. She agreed. I never told your mother. I never told you. I told myself I would not tell anybody, because the moment a man tells a story like this is the moment the story stops being about the boy and starts being about the man. The boy's name was Marcus Walters. He graduated from the University of Texas in 2006 with a degree in civil engineering. He runs a company in Austin now that builds affordable housing for veterans' families. I went to a groundbreaking he held in 2019, and I stood in the back row and I did not introduce myself. He does not know my face. He does not know my name. He never will. I want you to know 2 things, Shaquille. The first is that the night you told me on the back porch in July of 1989 that I was not your real father, you were right in a way that does not hurt the way you thought it would. I did not need to be. Being whatever I was enough. The second is that what you said that night is the thing that made me drive to Baton Rouge 2 weeks later. I had to make sure the rule would outlast me, even if nothing else did. It has. You have lived it. I have watched you live it for 31 years. There is a manila folder in the duffel bag with everything you need to keep the arrangement with Mrs. Walters going if you want to. She is 81. Marcus does not need the money anymore. But she does. The folder is what you do next, if you choose to. I am not asking. I am offering. Your father, who chose you twice, and would have chosen you a 3rd time, Philip. Shaq did not move for a long time. The sound of his own breathing got louder than the clock. He read the letter twice. He read it a 3rd time. He set it down on the bed beside him and reached over and picked up the photograph from the nightstand and turned it over. And the photograph was of Philip on the back porch in San Antonio in 1989, the summer they had fought, holding a small folding chair in one hand and his keys in the other, about to leave for somewhere. And on the back of the photograph in Lucille's handwriting it said, "He drove 11 hours to give that boy a rule. Then he came home." Shaq stood up. He walked over to the duffel bag on the chair and opened it. Inside was the manila folder Philip had described, and inside the folder were 33 years of receipts, every single check, every single bank statement, every single tuition payment, every single line item neatly recorded in Philip's small, careful handwriting, and underneath all of it, a recent photograph of an older woman with white hair sitting on a porch in Houston, smiling, with a sticky note in Philip's handwriting that said only, "Mrs. Walters, she is who you call first." Shaquille O'Neal, who had stood in NBA Finals games on national television in front of millions of people, sat down on the floor of that small back bedroom with his back against the chair and the manila folder in his lap, and he cried the way grown men cry when something they had been waiting their whole life to understand has finally said its own name out loud. He cried for 30 seconds, then 40, then a minute. Then he reached for his phone. He did not call his mother yet. He did not call his wife yet. He called the number clipped to the inside of the folder, the number for Mrs. Walters in Houston. And when an old woman's voice answered on the third ring, he said, in a voice his mother had used in a cereal aisle in East Orange when he was 7 years old, "Ma'am, my name is Shaquille O'Neal. My father, Philip Harrison, was a friend of your husband, Eugene. I am holding a folder of his in my hands. I would like to drive to Houston this afternoon if I may. There is something I would like to keep doing, if you would let me." So what did everybody learn that morning? A son learned that the worst thing he had ever said to the only father he had ever known had not been the last word in the conversation, that the conversation had been going on quietly for 31 years without him, and that grown men who choose you twice will sometimes choose you a third time without ever telling you about the second one. An old woman in Houston, named Mrs. Walters, learned that the man who had been quietly paying her bills for 33 years had a stepson who was sitting on the floor of a back bedroom holding the receipts and crying. A grown engineer in Austin named Marcus Walters, who built affordable housing for veterans' families and did not know why, learned nothing yet, because Shaq had decided in that bedroom that Philip's one condition was going to be honored for as long as Mrs. Walters was alive. A wife in Florida named Shawnee learned, 2 days later when her husband finally sat on their back porch and told her the whole story, that the man she had married had been raised by a quieter man than even she had understood. And a man in a faded gray t-shirt and old boots learned, again, what his stepfather had told him so many times it had stopped being a sentence and become weather. Don't be a reaction, be a response. He had not been a reaction in that bedroom, he had been a response, and his mother was standing somewhere in the back of his mind in a cereal aisle in East Orange in 1979 with her hands on his shoulders. The men who change your life don't always shout. Sometimes they just stay. Sometimes they just keep showing up. He had not learned to recognize it in time to thank Philip out loud. But Philip had not needed to be thanked. Philip had needed somebody to keep going. And Shaq was going to keep going. He never forgot. And neither should you. If this story moved you tonight, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hit that like button so the algorithm shows this story to one more person who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because this is what we do here. We tell the stories where the quiet ones win. The next video in your queue is the one about the homeless man at the gas station who turned out to be somebody Philip had served with. We will see you there. Paste your script.